Welcome, everyone. It's July 31st, 2020. I'm David L. Goodwin, a trustee of the Historical Society of the New York Courts and an appellate public defender in New York City. This interview is part of the Society's Bar Response to the Pandemic project, where we're documenting the myriad ways COVID-19 has changed the practice of law for the bar and, via a parallel project, for the bench. Lots has changed, some good, some bad, some just different. Today, I'm fortunate enough to interview Mr. David Lebowitz, a partner at Kaufman, Lieb, Lebowitz, and Frick. I'm going to let Mr. Lebowitz do most of the talking about himself and his firm, so I'll just say that the firm is a civil rights and commercial litigation firm in New York. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So give me a little bit of background about the firm and also about yourself. What was your path to it? What's your current role, and what's the firm's area of practice?
Sure. So my firm, as you mentioned, is a boutique litigation firm with an emphasis on civil rights. I previously worked for a number of years at one of the bigger for civil rights law firms in the city, Emery Chelly, for almost 7 years, and then launched this new firm, which has a fairly similar set of practice areas with 3 of my colleagues from the previous firm. As it happens, after months of intense discussions and planning and consideration, we, in our infinite wisdom, announced our departure to our previous employers the last week of February of 2020 with a launch date of March 30th.
Wonderful timing.
In between the announcement and the launch of the firm, COVID struck New York City, everything shut down. We worked our last 2 or 3 weeks at the previous firm from home, and then launched the new firm from home as well. So it was a bit anticlimactic going from working for one law firm in my bedroom to starting my own law firm in my bedroom. I have been in our physical office twice. Both times.
So you know it exists. That's the important thing.
Right. Both times I was there, the firm actually did not exist yet. So I'd never been in the office since the time that the firm came into existence. But as far as I know, it's still there. My partner went and picked up the mail recently. So the firm is a relatively new venture, and it has never existed outside of the COVID-19 era.
But you as an attorney have practiced outside of the COVID-19
That is
era,
true.
so you've got at least a basis for comparison. I realize we've been bandying this term about without defining it. So can you give a quick summary of what you mean by civil rights insofar as your firm's practice is concerned?
Absolutely. So the vast majority of our practice is on the plaintiff side for people with the sort of full spectrum of what we refer to as civil rights claims, which includes claims of government abuse of various kinds, so police brutality type cases, wrongful convictions, false arrests, police and prison cases. We work on First Amendment and voting rights cases. We work on disability abuse and discrimination cases. And then we also have quite a bit of housing and employment discrimination work, which falls sort of under the umbrella of civil rights, although the defendants tend to be private actors in those cases as opposed to government actors. So we sort of litigate under the full panoply of federal civil rights laws, including Section 1983 and Title VII, the Fair Housing Act, the ADA, and all their sort of state and local analogs. And so unlike, I think, some other practitioners in this area who tend to specialize either in sort of employment discrimination or police cases, we sort of consider ourselves to be civil rights generalists. And then we also have sort of a mixed commercial litigation and dispute resolution practice as well.
So judging, I guess, from the kinds of cases you just described, would you say the majority of your cases are in federal court?
Yes, certainly the majority, and I would say the great majority are in federal court, although we do have some commercial litigation, which tends to more commonly be in state court, and some other sorts of various kinds of proceedings that are sort of ancillary to the civil rights practice can end up in state court and in administrative agencies as well. So for example, the City Human Rights Commission is a forum where we practice a fair amount.
So you're coming to this then, and I want to make sure we hit all aspects of this, both from a perspective of someone who's, been affected by COVID-19, but also someone who's had to build something new during this very extremely odd period. And I'd love to hit both aspects of that. So from a firm building perspective, how has that genesis, you mentioned it was anticlimactic, been affected by the normal, how have the normal things that you would do when starting a new firm been affected by what's going on in the world right now?
Sure. I think everything about the planning and launch of the firm was affected in some way or another by this. Obviously, a key aspect of launching any new business is marketing and sort of getting your name and profile out there. So we had various sorts of plans for in-person marketing of various kinds, the usual attending events, presenting CLEs, having events at your office,
Events.
Lunches and all of that is obviously out the window when everybody's staying home. So we had to, rest pretty heavily on online and other sort of virtual forms of marketing and doing those things. And then obviously, we needed clients and we needed matters. I mean, we continued on a few things that we brought with us from our previous firm and some things, that were in the works. Couple things that were somewhat in the works before COVID-19 struck, but the vast majority of the business that we've generated since we founded the firm has been during this era, and usually a big part of building rapport with clients and interviewing them, learning about them, building their trust, and learning about their case involves in-person interaction. I mean, you have generally, before I would sign up a client, I would meet with them and talk to them and sit across the table from them and hear, look them in the eye while they tell their story and see, how they present themselves and all the rest. And, particularly in the populations I think that we typically represent, although there's no sort of one type of client that we have, not everyone is as sort of used to or has the same facility with video conferencing and even email or some of the other technologies that we rely on. I mean, people who are just out of prison, for example, or who are for various other reasons just not, don't have that same facility, tend to be the people that we represent. And so that's been a challenge as well. We've had to sort of be flexible and adapt with that. And so, it's really affected pretty much everything that we've done, but we sort of went into this project, obviously not knowing that COVID would exist, but we went into the launch of the firm sort of trying to emphasize as one of our comparative advantages in the marketplace, so to speak, at being, being leaner, adaptive, nimble, and able to sort of capitalize on technology to sort of modernize the way we practice and go for more paperless. And so I think because we had planned for some of that in advance, not that we weren't scrambling like everyone was, but we had some of that. We had thought about some of those kinds of issues beforehand, which was helpful.
You had some of the future proofing built in other words.
Sure. I mean, to the extent that such a thing was possible when 6 months ago, none of us could ever have dreamed up the reality that we live in now.
Exactly. I mean, you mentioned just a second ago, one of the big issues being client intake. I'm curious, so how have you dealt with that problem?
Well, I mean, in our world, as in I think most types of litigation practice, a lot of clients come to us from referrals from other attorneys. I mean, civil rights is sort of unique in that regard in some ways, because unlike, say, if you represent clients in a particular industry in commercial disputes or financial services or whatever, where they sort of have regular and predictable need for legal services, and they might have the same lawyer and have regular needs that they go to them for over the course of a long period of time. Generally, we don't have repeat clients who get wrongfully convicted or beaten by the police or fired because of their race, every year or something like that. So it's less common, I think, to have sort of repeat clients, but they still do come in from referrals a lot of the time. And then we also have a fair amount of sort of cold intakes that come in either from online advertising, through our website, folks who just call up and have questions that they need answered. And for better or worse, because of what we do, it's sort of, we sort of joke sometimes about it being a recession-proof field, which is a sort of grim or crass way of looking at it. But so long as there is discrimination and official misconduct in the world, people will need our services.
So you get the referral, you bring someone in. You mentioned that usually when you do a first client interview, you want to look someone in the eye as they tell their story. Have you been able to do that, or at least achieve some facsimile of that, using Zoom or video conferencing or whatever substitute you've been putting in place?
Yeah, I would say, we sort of try to, we at least will speak to folks on the phone or by video conference before they retain us. And we sort of, I think, take a little bit our direction from the client and their comfort and what they prefer. Not everyone wants to video conference from their home, for example. But it is something that we try to be really sensitive and attentive to, because often when we have a stranger who's coming to us for assistance with something that may be one of the worst or most traumatic things that they've ever experienced, and they're talking to a complete stranger, and so the more attenuated the interpersonal connection is over the phone or through a computer screen, the more sort of delicate I think it is. And so we try to be really attentive to that. There's no sort of clear solution that is immediately apparent, but we try to, just at the very least acknowledge that sort of discomfort or difficulty, and smooth it out as much as we can for the person.
Now, I know that the firm is still fairly nascent, but you also mentioned you had some overlap with your old firm during the beginning of this pandemic. What has your experience been like in terms of actual court proceedings? Have you appeared? And if yes, what's that been like for you?
Sure. So I have done some court appearances and a couple of depositions since the pandemic started and since the shutdown started. All of those have been in federal court. So because all of my litigation practice is civil, generally in state court, there's been very little activity in civil cases since the pandemic started. For that matter, there's been a great reduction in criminal matters too, but for a long time, you couldn't even file any for several months after the shutdown began. The state courts weren't even accepting filings in civil cases, and all the statutes of limitation were told, and things were largely put on ice. And federal court, which I think to some extent was, before this all started, a little bit further along or better set up in terms of being able to do things electronically and less reliant on hard copy papers. There was not quite as much, I think, of a sort of need to build things from scratch. And so that's where most of the more active litigations that I've had going on have been happening in the last few months. All of the appearances that I've done have been virtual. So generally with court conferences, I have colleagues who have done them by video. I haven't had any, I haven't done a trial or an evidentiary hearing or anything like that, where you would really feel like you need some kind of visual. So for discovery conferences, status conferences, things like that, the judges that I've been in front of have generally been holding them by telephone. For depositions, we've done them by Zoom. You have the court reporter on the video conference. You can swear the person in remotely. And you can use screen share to show exhibits, and generally we've tried to sort of work it out so we can send the witness anything they're going to need to refer to during the deposition in advance. Everyone's sort of just feeling their way along. And I think there was a recognition fairly early on that if people didn't adapt in some ways, that things were just going to grind to a halt in a way that was going to be pretty unsatisfactory.
So this might be a very silly question, but are the appearances you just described, the status conferences, the discovery conferences, and the depositions, are those the kind of things you would ordinarily be doing in person?
Yes. So occasionally in federal court, I mean, there's sort of different practices among the judges and magistrate judges. Sometimes, you know, if there's an issue that needs to that's discrete and needs to be resolved in the course of discovery or something going on in a civil case, the parties will be convened by the court over the phone. But more typically, those are done in person. And so I have done telephone appearances for those kinds of proceedings before COVID, but it's much less common. Depositions, you know, in certain circumstances where there's some need to either save costs or there's some practical impediment to doing them in person. I've had very, very occasional experiences over the years where we've done them either over the telephone or by video, but almost always, I mean, as counsel, you want them to be in person because you want to be able to see someone, see their demeanor. You want to be able to show them things and look them in the face. So that's definitely something that, you know, it works, and it's preferable to just not moving forward. But I think most people who have had experiences doing depositions remotely would tell you probably that they wish they didn't have to.
So I was about to say, so it's my assumption that, you know, you found them to be preferable to not having anything been done, but you're looking forward to resuming the old way, as it were.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think as with a lot of the adaptations that we've all been forced to take on in this time, sort of the worst fears about how it would end up have not really come to fruition. I mean, I would say it's fine. In a perfect world, maybe we would be doing these things in person, but I've had very little in the way of experiences where I think like, wow, this is really just totally unworkable, and I really wish it were in person. Generally speaking, things have been working out.
Is there anything about the current kind of situation we find ourselves in, either in terms of court practice or just general law firm practice, that you think we should actually carry forward once this is all over?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think one of my partners was saying recently that, you know, she lives in Harlem and she had a court appearance in the Eastern District of New York, which had it been in person would have been in downtown Brooklyn, where it would have taken her probably close to an hour to get there. Then you would go to the courtroom and you'd wait for whatever the previous you know, case on the docket was doing to finish up, and you'd have your discovery conference, maybe it would be 10 or 15 minutes, and then you'd leave, you'd go back, you know, you'd have to go through security and you get on the subway and you end up spending half your day. And she was able to, because it was remote, dial a phone number, do the 15-minute part, and then be finished. And she was remarking that, you know, for sort of routine appearances that really don't merit a huge investment of time and resources that can just be resolved in a sort of more straightforward way like that, that for the benefit of the bar and the bench and clients in terms of costs and everything like that, that, you know, that would be something worth considering in the future. And some judges do that, and I did think that way beforehand, but not all of them.
Would you be surprised to learn that that is the thing everyone has said?
I would not be surprised to hear that.
Across practice areas too. I've interviewed someone who does special education litigation, you know, another public defender like myself, and a few others, and everyone has said it's amazing. Things happen when they're supposed to, and there's none of that 40 minutes of travel on each side and 40 minutes of waiting around before you call and say adjourned. And
right.
And one wonders whether that's something that we can do once the world is back to normal. In terms of your very unique experiences as someone who has been extraordinarily so in transition during this period, but has kept a practice moving forward, what are words of advice that you would give other lawyers? One, I guess, just starting out, but two, who might be in your position at this juncture in the pandemic?
Well, I think, I'm not sure. I think the best advice I would really be able to give is, to be flexible, to sort of be willing and able to adapt to how things change, and to keep your sort of communications and your interpersonal networks open, and because everybody is sort of in the same boat right now, right? Everybody is sort of stuck at home or working remotely, and people have their personal obligations and childcare and all the rest, and but people still have legal needs, and so because we were starting a business during this period, obviously, it was really important for us to sort of remain engaged with people that were, not only because we wanted to remain in touch with our friends and colleagues, but also for the additional reason that we wanted to make sure that even though we weren't physically, having an open house at our new office or whatever, that it was still sort of visible to people that we were doing this and starting this firm. And so just sort of remaining in touch with people and doing what you can to keep your profile raised and to put your name in people's minds, I think has been important.
Oh, excellent. David, is there anything that you think we should touch upon about the current goings on that we haven't talked about yet?
I don't think so.
I was going to say, I was going to begin this before we got right into the nitty gritty of the legal practice. I was going to ask you what your personal experience has been like during COVID-19. And I did note that on your law firm profile, it says you enjoy international travel, eating your way across New York City, and attempting to provide the excellent standard of service demanded by your rescue Cocker Spaniel. I imagine that two of those things might have been subsumed by the third at this point.
That is true. The eating my way across the city and the international travel have definitely been curtailed. Mm-hmm. The experience of having a dog in Manhattan during this time, as I'm sure others, if you talk to any dog owner during this time, it's been interesting because in some ways our dogs have been sort of our lifeline to the outside world. Like even when the shutdown first started and it was really, really intense and, people were afraid to, touch the doorknob of their building. We still had to take the dog out 3 or 4 times a day and, confirm that the real world was still there outside of our apartment. And that's remained true. I think, it's good to have an excuse to get up and go walk in Central Park a couple times every day. It's been nice to help keep me sane. But
to quote a very popular YouTube video, the walks are clutch.
Yes, indeed.
David, thank you so much for joining me. Your contribution to this is really appreciated. And I wish you the best of luck with your firm going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Daniel, are you still there?
Yes. Can you do a quick outro? Just direct the people to the website.
Sure. Do you want me to do that right now, or do you want to mute again and for me to do something?
Yeah, mute and then you do it.
Sure.
Okay, so I'll mute and then you count to 5 starting now.
Just before you you just want me to direct people to nycourts.gov/history?
History.nycourts.gov.
Gotcha. Will do.
Okay. All right, you can count to 5 starting now.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you so much, Mr. Lebowitz, for joining us. And for those who are interested in learning more about this ongoing project, we invite you to come to our website, the Historical Society of the New York Courts, which is history.nycourts.gov. Once again, I'm David L. Goodwin, a trustee of the Historical Society of the New York Courts, and we thank you so much for watching.